Hello and welcome to PredictIt Live, only on Old Bull TV, your exclusive source for real-time coverage of the stock market for politics. Today, we've got your first look at new markets on the censure of Marjorie Taylor Greene and the increasingly crowded New York Republican gubernatorial primary, plus the looming Senate closure vote on the January 6th commission, and Andrew Yang's mayoral coronation hits yet another snag. Let's get to it. Back, political traders. I am your host, Flip Pideaux. And if you're new to PredictIt, we are setting you up as always with $25 in real free cash to trade with. You just head to predictit.org/promo/oldbull25 for that free deposit match. We have no panel in the virtual studio today. So if you're with us live, go ahead and say hi in the chat window. And in fact, if you have a question, we're going to try something new and more interactive today. You can either ask it right in the chat as usual, or if you want to come on live with us on the air, brush your hair, make sure your webcam and mic are hooked up, and we will put a link to that conference in the chat window. And if you're not watching live, please send in your questions and market coverage requests via Twitter, where we are Old Bull TV, and our DMs are open. Please take a quick second also to subscribe to the channel while you're here. Click that bell icon, receive notifications every time we go live. And as you do that, let's get started talking about this January 6th commission and its fate in the Senate. In particular, we want to look at the procedural vote, the vote on the cloture motion that Senator Schumer filed just last night. Now, this sets up a potential vote as early as Thursday morning would be the first time that cloture motion ripens, with somewhere in the low to mid 50 senators signaling support for that thus far. Our whip count has that at around 54 based on senators' most recent comments, but of course that could be off by one or two or more. So we're not looking to try and pinpoint an exact bracket here, assuming the vote does go forward. But viewers that were with us late last week know that we had actually been advising buying the bottom bracket here, the 50 or fewer, which is effectively a proxy for the vote, the cloture vote, not taking place at all before the 28th, which of course is Friday, going into the long weekend. And now, well, we didn't actually cover that in the show. We were going into this a lot on Twitter going into last weekend. The bottom bracket was trading around 29 cents at that point. We thought that looked pretty attractive and continued to be in the subsequent days as Schumer was making these sort of loud saber rattling promises to bring it forth to a vote soon. And despite the fact that there was a really, really, really narrow path to 60, if any path to 60. So it looked like ultimately this would, at least taking Schumer at face value, that there would be an imminent cloture vote and that it would fail, but not fail with 50 or fewer, fail with maybe 52, 53, 54, something like that, which is why the bottom bracket here was trading so low and in fact suffered a number of panics. Even as it would drift up, even to 70, 80 cents, there'd be panic after, say, Senator Romney or Senator Murkowski indicated that they were actually now favorably inclined to vote for it. I think sort of mistakenly, the market was panicking on that bottom bracket saying, oh, well, it can't be 50 now. It's more likely to be greater than 50. But of course, again, this really was simply a proxy about whether a cloture vote would take place or not. Now, our reasoning going through not only the weekend, but up until yesterday was that, Schumer kept saying he hopes to have a vote this week. He wants to have a vote this week. But of course, he being the majority leader and the one that would be filing cloture could simply force a vote this week. The political calculus seemed to be, and in fact may still be, that Schumer and Pelosi do indeed want a commission more than the alternative, which would be a select committee within Congress. So that they would like to get to 60 votes if possible, that this is not the hill that they're going to have the filibuster die on. They would like to get to 60 if possible. Again, the path seems super narrow. That's why we've been doing this whip counting to see if there are plausibly 10 GOP senators who would support it. It is conceivable if the amendment that's purportedly being worked on by Senator Collins' office were to come to fruition, that you could get those 10. And so our calculus, based on our perception of Schumer's calculus, again, was that he would like to get to 60. And so saying he's going to bring it to a vote this week, even the filing of the cloture, could conceivably be his simply saying, look, we're going to put you on record. We know, everyone knows that the vote, if held now or tomorrow morning, which is as soon as it might be held, would effectively be doomed, because we don't yet know what Collins' amendment is going to say. There's still several more fence-sitting Republican senators that would need to come over for a cloture vote to actually pass. So the question is Schumer just putting this up to say, no, we're at the end game already. It's definitely not going to pass. We definitely have no path to 60. So let's just put the Republicans on record and try and clobber them with this vote come midterms. Or is there still some possibility that this is the next step in sort of the pressure tactics of his saying, okay, well, Collins, you've got an amendment that you think can get 6 more or 8 more potentially of your colleagues to come on board. Let's see it, and let's see it now, because we're going to vote possibly as soon as Thursday morning. Now, again, the fact that Schumer filed cloture on Tuesday night doesn't mean that they have to vote Thursday. It just means he can force a vote as early as Thursday, possibly even sooner if the chamber agrees to sort of an off-schedule vote on that now filed cloture motion. So you have to have a strong stomach to stay in this one. And, again, while we started recommending it in the high 20s up through, past 50 into even the kind of low 70s, and it got up slightly over 80 a couple of days ago. So depending on when you got in, if you follow our advice in this one, you may be significantly underwater at this point. We hope that you aren't. We hope you were able to take some profits off the table, or maybe that just kept your powder dry. But if you're looking at this one anew or as a potentially underwater trader, if your stomach is sufficiently strong, there may be an opportunity to still hold this here. It's now trading at about 20 cents. This is sort of the outside view that a vote will still not happen this week, but it's not assured. If it does happen, sort of the base case, it's going to be tomorrow, probably relatively early in the day, early in the legislative calendar. But there are a number of ways to play this one. You can either try and nail the number. Is it going to be 54? Or could you want to try and buy a couple neighboring bands, 53, 54, 54, 55? Those could pan out. I would really keep a close eye, though, on statements by the several political reporters that are covering, all the action surrounding this, and we retweet a lot of the salient ones on our Twitter feed, and obviously statements by the majority leader and Senator Collins, Senator Toomey, Murkowski, Romney, and some of the others that we've been sort of keeping an eye on to see if there's sort of this emerging consensus that wait, let's pump the brakes just a little bit, because yes, maybe we still do have a path to 60. If there are glimmers that, there really could still be a path to 60 and the die is not quite cast, then the bottom bracket here could still have a prayer. So we want you to keep an eye on that, but be wary that this one can swing wildly, has swung wildly several times, and certainly has the capacity to continue to do so. One kind of overall lesson, though, divorcing ourselves from this specific market, and again, we've been tweeting a lot about this the last couple of days, is that there's often an opportunity to buy the panic and ride the swings in a market like this that's so driven by news stories, rumors, leaks, statements by various members, and where traders can be expected to wildly overreact, and you get these real whipsaw trades. So again, we hit 80, we went back to 40, or actually I think kind of mid 30s, back to 80 again, then back to about 50, started drifting higher. I've forgotten what it was before the final panic, before Schumer actually filed the cloture motion, when it went back down then into the teens, actually. And now I'm going to pull up on my screen for most recent price update. So now we're back to about 20 cents. So it's obviously been pretty wild. But if you, again, have the stomach for it, playing these swings and trying to profit off of some of the overreaction and panic among traders can be a high stress, but sometimes high reward strategy on PredictIt. So with that being kind of the current state of play, we're gonna be keeping our eyes closely on this. So do follow us on Twitter. We'll try and bring you as much up to date real time information over the next, say, 24 hours, when this will likely come to a head one way or another. But we do want to spend some time looking at a couple of the new markets that have just hit PredictIt today. Oops, hang on. I've just clicked something and I'm hearing my own voice from about a minute ago in my ear. There we go. It's gone now. Where are we? We're on the new markets, and two in particular we want to look at. You see in the top middle and top left of your screen now are the New York Republican nominee for governor in 2022. This is the eventual nominee to challenge incumbent Andrew Cuomo for his would-be fourth term, and a House censure of Marjorie Taylor Greene by the end of July. Now, the very short title here that fits within the box is a little bit misleading, because this is actually and we'll talk about Greene here first, then we'll come back to New York. This is actually tied to a formal censure or a formal House reprimand of Representative Greene. You can see this is open trading just in the last hour or so. It's currently 26. It actually opened a little higher. I saw it printed about 35 when it first hit the market a bit earlier today, so it's drifted down a little bit. I thought at 35 it seemed about right. Despite the near universal condemnation of Greene's comments, and for reference, if you haven't been following along, she made some comments about how mask mandates are the equivalent or similar to, here it's coming on screen now, the Holocaust. Vaccinated employees get a vaccination logo just like Nazis forced Jewish people to wear a gold star. Vaccine passports and mask mandates create discrimination against unvaxxed people who trust their immune system to a virus that is 99% survivable. Obviously, this was not a popular thing for her to say, and she's gotten condemned by members right, left, and center throughout the halls of Congress. But if you just look historically, formal censures of sitting Congress members are extraordinarily rare. Reprimands, which again, this market does also cover, somewhat less rare, still not particularly typical, even though both of them are really fairly rhetorical punishments. Congress can also impose a monetary fine along with them, but typically they don't. It's simply them, dragging you out before the public and saying we condemn what we sort of formally and officially condemn what you've done. If you look at this list of formal reprimands and censures, and we're in sort of a different era now since the formation of the House Ethics Commission in the mid 60s or late 60s than we were prior to that. In the 19th century, members would get censured all the time for unparliamentary language and things like this, anything that would sort of offend the sensibilities of the chamber. Since the 1967 creation of the Ethics Committee, it's really for things that are more kind of criminal in nature: lying, cheating, stealing, fraud. You can see here improper use of campaign funds, engaging in sexual conduct with a House page. So somewhat more egregious things, rather than simply saying something, however bad it is, saying something that was broadly seen as offensive. You can see the most recent time someone was actually censured in the House was Charlie Rangel in 2010, so over a decade ago. And again, this had to do with false disclosure statements, failure to pay taxes, improper solicitation of funds. So some of the things that are kind of more concrete examples of potential violations of various criminal codes. If you look at reprimanded representatives, again, it's a little bit more common, but not very. I mean, you had sort of the one that people think of a lot as Joe Wilson interrupting President Obama's State of the Union address, and that being in 2009. You've only had two occasions of formal reprimands since. However, so that being sort of the stage setting for this being, either of these being a pretty rare punishment for the House to exact upon one of its sitting members. It's not to say that we live in kind of the same level of rancor in terms of the partisanship within the House. In fact, was it a month ago, or maybe even less than a month ago, that Maxine Waters was censured? I'm just trying to pull up the vote count if I can. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was a perfectly party line vote. And this was in response to her saying that people need to get more confrontational, suggesting, or people inferred it to suggest, meaning physically confrontational about police brutality. And of course, Republicans sort of seized on this as a counterpoint to the idea that Trump was inciting violence against the Capitol, against Mike Pence, against whoever else. And it was something like 216 to 210. So with maybe a couple of non-votes, it was effectively a perfectly party line vote. And given the close, balance of power in the Congress, a perfect party line vote is going to be just within a few votes on either side. So if this one were to play out the same way, obviously this is more of a Democrat-led effort, being that Greene is a member of the Republican delegation. But you may also have some Republicans willing to cross over and say, no, we're willing to throw in with censure, or at very least reprimand in this case. But even without those, with a perfectly party line vote, obviously she could be reprimanded, even formally censured. So I'm going to take another look at where this has gone now. 28 cents. This is a risky one. But you worry to play this. I think there's potential value on the upside here. This seems to me to be potentially undervalued. I mean, it seems that it is likely to come for a vote. And what is to stop all Democrats from voting for it? And again, maybe even a handful, maybe more than a handful of Republicans from joining suit. So I tend to like the yes side on this Greene contract, and doesn't mean necessarily you have to see it through to resolution. Of course, as with any predicted contract, you're free to get in and out ad infinitum. So it's possible as people sort of ponder this a little further, or if a bill actually gets calendared, comes to the floor, you may see some upside here that you can take some money off the table before even seeing how the vote finally comes out. Let's jump over to the other new one that we're taking a look at today. And this is the New York gubernatorial primary, the Republican gubernatorial primary in 2022. You can see a number of candidates on the board here. There are even more if you look at the list of people who are said to be thinking about running. In fact, several who haven't formally declared but are expected to potentially run are actually on this market already. So what's interesting here is that several of these folks, in fact, the top three you can see listed, it's having just been launched a short time ago. You don't have a very liquid order book here. Not all the candidates yet have prices. But the top three here, Zeldin, Giuliani, and John Catsimatidis, are all pretty heavy, Trump-friendly, MAGA lane kind of candidates. Perhaps Zeldin least so, or at least perhaps his Trump alliance is less singularly defining for him, given that he's a several-term congressman from a relatively purplish area of New York, being the eastern end of Long Island. But in terms of how these folks are going to maybe split the statewide Republican vote in New York, you can see potentially these three kind of splitting the MAGA faction. The one just beneath John Catsimatidis that you see there, Rob Astorino, is kind of the exception to that. He's a more recent entrant to this race. Thus far, Zeldin has kind of cleaned up most of the institutional support. He's got, I think he's crossed the 50% threshold now in terms of population-weighted county executives who are supporting him. And that's largely more than largely, it is basically the barometer by which the state party will select its endorsed candidate. That does not necessarily mean that person becomes the nominee. And in fact, Astorino has said if he can't capture enough institutional support, establishment support within the party, he will force it to a primary. Oftentimes in New York, once the party makes up its mind, everyone else kind of goes away because the parties are so influential and so powerful in the nominating process that it's sometimes not worth running an insurgent campaign. Astorino has said he will, even if he doesn't get the party's endorsement. So assuming Astorino makes good on that, and assuming one or more of the non-endorsed Trump-allied candidates, whether it's Giuliani, Catsimatidis, or others, continue as well, that may help pave the way for the slightly insurgent, ostensibly outsider candidate Astorino to win a plurality of the vote in the primary. And I say, ostensibly outsider or insurgent candidate Astorino because he's certainly not an anti-establishment guy, or not someone that would ruffle the feathers of the state party too much. You wouldn't think. Even he was the Republicans' candidate for this same contest for the gubernatorial election in 2014. So this was the first time that Cuomo was up for re-election. And in fact, of the three times that Cuomo's been elected, Astorino in 2014 came much closer than anyone else has to unseating him. It was still a double-digit loss, I think 13 or 14 points, but that's the only time that Cuomo has lost by less than, I think, 20 or 25 points even. So Astorino, well-liked, well-known by the statewide Republican apparatus. Voters have voted for him. Statewide voters have voted for him. Republicans have in the past. They'll recognize the name. He is certainly much less of a Trump-aligned candidate. Knows how to run a statewide campaign. And, it's interesting because this, depending on how this all sort of fleshes out, could set up a bit of a kind of Trump, anti-Trump proxy, battle in New York in mid 2022. So, assuming these prices are still operative. I'm going to refresh on my screen to see if they are. Yeah, we still got Zeldin at 30, Giuliani 10, Catsimatidis 1, and Astorino 0. I should say also as an aside, Andrew Giuliani, presumably you all know, that's the son of former New York mayor and Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani. John Catsimatidis is a billionaire grocery tycoon. I think he says he's going to run on both the Republican and the liberal party lines. He's the father of Andrea Catsimatidis, who's the New York County, which is Manhattan Republican Party. Both she and her father, John, are super Trump supporters. He'd obviously be able to self-finance his campaign and stick it, stay with it through to the finish line. Wouldn't have any problem with campaign finance. But again, it's sort of part of the reason that I would see if the primary is contested beyond the convention, that you could have the Trump supporters sort of splitting their block, potentially paving the way for Astorino. So ultimately, I think this is going to come down to a race between Zeldin and Astorino, right? How much headway, how much goodwill can Astorino engender in the party before the rest of the county executives and statewide establishment, party establishment make up their minds, and then if it goes through to contested primary, to what extent does the Trump vote being split make a credible path for Astorino? But as you're looking at these order books and trying to figure out potentially how to start getting into this market, it is probably those top four that are going to maintain prices above a couple of pennies. Zeldin, Giuliani, Catsimatidis, and Astorino. But ultimately, this I think is a race between Zeldin and Astorino. So just in terms of where you're expecting these prices to shake out, both Zeldin and Astorino probably deserve between, say 25 and 45 cent prices, with Giuliani and Catsimatidis being the only others that would probably be anywhere near double digits. And the rest of these guys would be, much closer to a couple of pennies. So that's sort of, the way I would think about the early shape of these couple of new races we've got on the board. While we're talking about New York too, I wanted to go back to something that we've covered a handful of times here with our panel. It's something that our sister project, the Open Model Project, it has been looking at and modeling somewhat more thoroughly, and we don't have that kind of detail at our disposal today. But the New York City mayoral race has really sort of seen a bit of a shakeup in the last couple of days. Well, the last couple of weeks, and even more so in the last couple of days. Of course, we saw Eric Adams take the lead from Andrew Yang, both in terms of his polling numbers and his predicted price for the first time within the last couple of weeks. But then just yesterday, Catherine Garcia, nonprofit CEO, and I believe formerly with the sanitation department, if I'm not mixing her up with one of the other candidates. But in any event, she got the New York Times endorsement a couple of weeks ago and suddenly rose to the top of an Emerson poll that came out yesterday. And not only was Garcia at the top, but Yang wasn't even number two. So it went Garcia, Adams, and then Yang. And Yang was actually way back. I think it was Garcia 21, Adams 20, and Yang 16. So it obviously shook these prices up quite a bit. Yang had been pushing back. I mean, he had recaptured frontrunner status on PredictIt. He was pushing back towards 50 cents. He'd be on his way to being the odds-on favorite again, which we remarked a couple of days ago is starting to look pretty frothy. Then this new poll came out and completely changed the pricing. Despite this change here, where Adams is back on top 39, Yang 36, Garcia 21, and then Stringer and Wiley at 6. It seems the market has not, fully digested the changing dynamics in this race, and it's really kind of the same refrain that we've been singing, for months now about this race. Again, both here and Open Model Project, which is basically that in New York, New Yorkers don't tend to pay enough attention to this race for their ultimate inclinations to make it into the polling numbers until very close to the actual primary. Certainly not before about 2 months before the primary. Now I think we're just about exactly a month, or it might be 4 weeks from yesterday is the primary date. Looking back to when de Blasio was first elected, that's when he first started to move in the polls, despite a much better known front runner in Christine Quinn, the Speaker of the Council. Here again, you've got Yang. You have a singular candidate who's a national household name, coming off a very well publicized and I think relatively well received within his own party, at least, campaign for the presidency just a year earlier in a huge, otherwise fractured field. So while he was the front runner in most, if not every poll for a while, that was still with maybe 20% polling support, despite universal or near universal name recognition. So it's no surprise that as we get closer and we get into this phase now that we're in, just several weeks before the primary, that more people are paying attention, more people are getting to know the likes of Scott Stringer, not always in a positive light, but Eric Adams, Maya Wiley, Catherine Garcia, as some of these endorsements have come out, as the unions have decided who they're going to back, as the candidates are doing more forums. And so it's no surprise that Yang may have been scraping closer to what was his eventual ceiling, to the point that now you've got two different candidates, again, at least in this one poll, coming out with their several points ahead of him. So I think as I look at these prices, again, where you've got, I just lost on the screen here, it's just come back. If I were to try and order these, this still seems like Adams is undervalued, Yang is overvalued. And I think actually Garcia, despite the fact that she topped that one poll, is overvalued here at 22. And I think Wiley may still be undervalued. And one of the reasons why, we've talked a lot about Wiley in the past and the fact that she has this sort of field topping name recognition adjusted favorability, and that not everyone really knew about her, especially before she hit that matching funds threshold that allowed her to sort of supercharge her campaign. But everyone that did know her really liked her, suggesting that her ceiling was much higher than her current level, with so much of the electorate still reporting themselves to be undecided. But the other thing that's just happened, or is sort of just happening now, that may suggest Wiley at 7 cents is still undervalued, is the fact that the campaign of Dianne Morales seems to be imploding. So this is a candidate who it was reported in the last day or so that there were some major senior staff defections to do with lack of payment, things like that. There were then some contradictory claims that came out of the campaign yesterday when the candidate actually skipped a debate or a candidate forum. It was not a debate, but it was a public availability of the rest of the candidates. The campaign then put out a statement, sort of vague but intriguing one, about the fact that a senior staff member and a couple other staff members have been separated from the campaign or gone on leave. And it has to do with potential mistreatment or abuse of other folks within the campaign. There are other less well-sourced, of course, that was a statement from the candidates, so nothing could be better sourced, but there was some other kind of, more anonymous reporting earlier today about the fact that some of this may have had to do with the candidate herself and her own treatment of staff members. So again, a lot of this is rumor and innuendo at this point, but something is going on to cause the candidate to take a day, miss this important event, tell all the staff you need to all take the day off and focus on self-care, was the way she put it, until we're ready to kind of come back. The reason I mentioned Morales and the fact that we may be sort of a few steps into a rapid implosion of her campaign is that her polling is not terribly significant, but it's also non-negligible. She polls at 5, 6, 7, 8%, something like that. But when you have front runners that are only at 20%, that can be significant. And if you look, because again, New York City for the first time is doing ranked choice voting, so a lot of the polls ask you to order your preference of candidate, and then they'll show in the simulated ranked choice rounds, one by one, the candidates get knocked out. So you can sort of see where the support for one candidate tends to go. Morales' support goes much more for Wiley than it does for Garcia or for any other candidate. So if she's, if she does fold up her tent, Morales, shortly, then there's probably 5 or more, maybe upwards of 8 percentage points of support there that are likely to overwhelmingly, and I mean 2/3 or 3/4, based on the RCV polling, to go to Maya Wiley, who's only a couple of points behind Garcia in the current polling averages. So that could be enough to suddenly maybe not make Miley the front runner, but really throw her back into the mix of this race to the point where, again, as I say, at 7 cents, makes her seem relatively undervalued, especially versus Miss Garcia. And likewise, I think the fact that Yang is still sort of neck and neck for front runner in the pricing is largely due to the fact that we haven't seen this dynamic that is playing out fully play out, which again is that Yang may have always been very close to his ultimate ceiling, and that as New Yorkers begin to pay more and more attention to this, Adams is the true front runner, with then one of these female candidates, Garcia or Wiley, being the possible spoiler. And of course, spoiler is the operative word in an RCV election, ranked choice vote election, where the only way really that the ranked choice mechanism can change the outcome is if you've got two roughly evenly matched front runners with, say, 45% of the vote, and then an also ran, third place that has a small but not negligible block of support, which in turn disproportionately tips towards one of those two front runners. In fact, to change the outcome, it would have to tip to the slightly less popular nominal front runner. And so we'll have to see as this further crystallizes in the next couple of weeks whether that kind of a situation is shaping up. It's obviously very rare historically, though the data sets are limited because not a lot of municipalities have this kind of election, but it is very rare to see an election where an RCV mechanism would actually change the outcome, but not outside the realm of possibility here in New York. So that's the way we're looking at the New York City race. That's the way we're looking at the New York State race. I want to jump back over to the chat window to see if we've got any questions or anyone who wants to jump in. I do see Daniel G is asking about, says he'd like to hear mentions of low profile elections happening in the next week. There are actually a few, going to bring up the list here in Mexico. It's actually not within the next week, but close enough. It's 10 days out, a week from Sunday. Mexico will be doing both gubernatorial and legislative elections. There are 3 on the site currently at PredictIt, the governor of 3 different states. Possible that PredictIt will be putting up a legislative election market as well. So keep an eye on those, Daniel, if you're interested in such elections. These are not ones that I've been looking at closely to weigh in on with any degree of insight or intellect, but maybe we can try and get a topical expert to come on the show. There we are, they're on the screen now. Although this also picks up New Mexico elections, so this is not those 2 on the bottom aren't as relevant. But maybe we can try and get someone on the panel next week that can weigh in more explicitly on the pricing on these markets, and if we get a legislative market from PredictIt as well on that one. I don't see anything else popping up in the chat at this point. So again, whether you're live or catching this on the replay, please do feel free to send us your feedback, send us your questions, send us your requests for other markets you'd like to see covered. We'll see you back here again at 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. New traders, again, don't forget to claim that $25 deposit match at predictit.org/promo/oldbull25. Follow us on Twitter at oldbulltv. Let us know your questions, requests for market coverage, and everything else. Thanks so much for watching, and happy trading. We'll see you next time.